looked at sort of early childhood physical development in relation to later academic and later behavioural, DCD diagnosis later on, like is there correlation between, missed out or had a very stressful early childhood or didn't crawl in a fully proficient manner, or, these sort of very early physical milestones relating to later on DCD and the subsequent kind of picture.
Again, great question. As a psychologist, we are required to do an in-depth developmental history of a client. So I'm always asking those things. I'm asking, what was prenatal like, what happened at birth, what happened after birth. This is really fascinating. Many children who have DCD, about 50% of them have some issues with oral motor, which affects speech, it affects swallowing, but many of these children struggled with nursing early on. But my sense is that if there was any kind of trauma at birth or any difficulty, that has really affected how those sensory signals are being integrated, coordinated into your whole being. And if those sensory signals aren't properly coordinated, then it's hard to really, am I getting this signal? Am I not getting this signal? Is it the right one? Is it too much? Because some children with DCD are hyper sensitive to sensory signals. And others are very hypo, like you need to express a lot of pressure to feel something. So I'm convinced that there's a real connection between sensory integration and DCD. Yeah.
Well, I always put, like I say, sensory and motor are one function. And I remember, I was in Norway at the time, there was a lady did research a long time ago into the pre-birth movements that the embryo does in utero. And that is the beginning of sensory-motor connections. So the baby actually has very predictable movements, and she categorized them all, pre-birth movements. And there's sensation that's coming back in response to the child moving. And so, I would definitely agree with you or join you on that idea that there may be the disruption very early on in those early laying down those early pathways of sensory-motor connections.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. If you think back to the early 1900s when French psychologist Piaget was studying, that was the whole basis. He talked about the sensory-motor is the foundation for all learning and cognition. And yet we, as in the discipline of psychology, we seem to have forgotten that was such a strong position 100 years ago.
And I'm a big fan of development and the power in our systems to develop. And so I always sort of am looking at my daughter with potential. And she is still developing. And we often going back and looking at those early steps or those early aspects, I know she still has primitive reflexes present, but there's such a deep ingrained drive and direction towards development, I feel, is kind of in the blueprint of us. And I love that in terms of like always seeing potential and supporting her in that aspect rather than looking at deficits.
Right. I love to use a metacognitive approach. So use the child's strengths to help address some of the motor difficulties. Fascinating way to kind of flip things. The cognitive load to plan, to initiate, to sequence, to direct your body to do things, that's where that cognitive, that mental piece comes in.
Yeah.
But we don't often think about that. And in fact, I often say to people that I see with DCD, they likely are working at 180% all day long because they have to continually direct what their body is to do, whereas typical children might be working at 60 or 70%, and it comes so easy for them. So I don't think we actually understand and give the right kind of compassion and understanding to students who really struggle to get their body to do what their mind wants.
Yeah. It's bringing to mind, when you're learning a new skill, it requires all your attention.
Yeah.
Like, it's new and you're monitoring how you're doing it. And once you've learnt it, like writing, it's put into the automatic part of the brain.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking anymore about holding the pencil, you're not thinking about how to do the A and the B, because you're thinking of the word you're writing. You've moved into a different level of concentration, let's say.
Exactly true. So those engrams are so well established that you don't have to think about it. So that there's no cognitive load in that regard. But when you are learning a new skill, or again, you have acquired a skill but you can't initiate it simply and easily and efficiently, it takes a whole lot of cognitive effort, mental effort.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I think it's an interesting name, Developmental Coordination Disorder, because there's nothing in that actual name that says anything about motor ability. You just have difficulty coordinating all these different aspects of life. The American Psychiatric Association has placed it underneath motor disorders. I sometimes think that's a disservice. It's seen motorically, but it's way, way bigger than a motor disorder.
Yeah, and that aspect, which again, it's only dawned on me in the last few years, that there's this piece before the action. There's the motor planning, or even, I was reading the word yesterday, the ideation.
Yeah.
And then the motor planning.
Yeah.
And then actually carrying it out. So I'd only ever sort of supported my daughter in the carrying out of it. And, I've sort of peeled back a little bit, and actually even that first sort of request or feeling like, oh, we're off to school, there's motor planning involved in that from the beginning of, this is a school morning,
Even getting out of bed.
Yeah.
Even getting out of bed, going to the bathroom, planning what you're going to wear, having breakfast at home, getting your backpack ready. So much of what we do on a day-to-day basis is part of that motor planning and then execution of the motor activity. And when it comes easy for youngsters, we don't think about it.
No, I know.
Even putting your seatbelts on, getting in and out of a vehicle.
Yeah.
Walking into the school, opening the door, taking off your footwear, changing your footwear, getting your bags, hanging up your jacket. There's so many motor tasks before a child even sits down at their desk.
Yeah. I've noticed that things can become automatic and kind of less effort. Like, I've seen her gain sort of mastery over certain skills, and they're coming in little pieces, and so now when it's time to put on socks, she gets that pattern, she knows how to do it. She doesn't visually check whether they're the right way round, and I allow that to be as it is, but yeah, I think that confuses people quite a bit, because they see someone capable.
Yeah.
Like, well, she can put her shoes on, or she can put her socks on, and then it's like, well, now you've just asked to do writing a word, but they've seen some coordination, or they've seen an ability. So, I think that really confuses people. But just the fact that you can master something, and then it becomes quite a fluid skill.
Yeah. Becomes well learned and automatic.
Yeah.
Can I come back to what you just said about, like, she's not looking at her socks?
Yeah.
Because the vision is a key piece for learning. And so many of the students that I've seen who have coordination issues also have some incoordination in their vision. So the eyes must team together perfectly in order to have depth perception, for quick visual gaze, for maintaining a visual gaze. And it's really, really critical to look what you're doing when you are directing your motor skills. The whole concept of hand-eye coordination would speak to that. Yeah. And so many academic tasks and activities of daily living require hand-eye coordination.
I know. And that's been such a challenge for us, because my daughter might have been able to look at things, but to look at something and move her hand or do something was too much challenge. And to do the visual steadying and tracking and also coordinate the body. Yeah. And for a long, long time, like a two-piece puzzle to put together, she'd look at it and then she would look away while she actually did it, because she couldn't process the two things together, the vision and the physical. And I was just recently, she's actually managing to put Lego together, and she's got her eyes still there with her action. So yeah, that visual part, she can't sort of ongoing check what's going on. So it's like socks, she'll look at them and then the rest will be done through feel, almost like a partially sighted person.
That's so fascinating, because I do assess individuals for DCD, and in my testing, I have often found that when you ask a question, the individual will look away, almost like they're reducing one other sensory piece. Mm-hmm. They'll look away, come up with the answer, and then respond. It's like it reduces the cognitive load just a wee little bit, enough for them to do the planning and the thinking. Initially I wondered, are they, is this ADHD kind of things? But more and more I think it's one really skilled technique that they have somehow sorted out, where they reduce the mentalization that's required to process the question and then come up with the response. Yeah. It's fascinating.
It is, isn't it? So along the lines of the avoidance, it takes me back to an image that just stuck in my head so vividly, and has actually informed me for years after, as to my daughter's behaviour. She was doing speech therapy, and the speech therapist was playing with animals and trucks and things, and Sophie was sitting, looking, engaged, and sort of fascinated, and the story was putting the animal in here. And then the speech therapist asked her, okay, can you put the giraffe in the truck? And Sophie just sat, and she obviously realised, I'm interpreting, she realised she didn't have a clue how to do that. And I know that she hadn't been playing with toys, she hadn't been using her hands. And so what she did, in all the innocence of a 4-year-old, she literally got up and walked away, because she was asked to do something that she didn't know quite how to do. She didn't know how to initiate that, she didn't know how to bring her hand up and move it. And so she got up and walked away, and that memory of a pretty innocent, natural response to being asked or a request has kind of stuck with me. And when I see her sort of say no or move away, I get it, because and I realise now also she's tuned into being asked now. She's had too many unrealistic requests put upon her, that now request and a demand to do something is sometimes just a trigger for her now. So, I can see how now she also has a learned behaviour to request, but I see where it has originally stemmed from. Yeah,
it shows to me how skilled these students and how aware they really are that they can't do it. But what coping mechanism can they, what else can they say? They can't blurt back an answer and say, no, I can't do it.
Yeah.
They can't perform the task. I'll never forget walking into a classroom some years ago. The teacher had asked a student to begin writing a story. It was an elementary student, and the youngster was all of a sudden being sent upstairs to the principal's office. I said, "What's going on?" He refused to write. I told him he had to start writing, and he was just playing with a pencil. And I said, "How much time did you give him to start writing?" "Well, his writing's always really, really bad, and he just always ignores, and he was oppositional." And I said, "But maybe he was processing the task, and playing with the pen, with the ruler, helped him focus a little bit. Because we can do it quickly doesn't mean the child can. There's got to be compassion for these youngsters who struggle motorically."
Yeah.
And the child ended up getting into difficulty, and eventually people thought he was oppositional. And I always thought, no, we're not really looking at the underlying issue, what's really going on.
Yes, and unless we're going to be more inquiring and give the benefit of the doubt in the first place. Yeah, a lovely OT once said to me that she always looks at a child with the belief that every child wants agency.
Yes.
They do want to be independent. And if they're not achieving it, it's the role of us adults to be supporting and finding, answers behind it. And I love that phrase, yeah.
Yeah, I really feel the same. I think every child wants to be adored or affirmed in some manner. They want to belong. They want to feel like they can contribute something. They want to be dealt with fairly and equally, like they see other children being dealt with. And when it doesn't work, I can't even begin to imagine how confusing and frustrating and upsetting that is. And that's where the whole emotional dysregulation comes from. It doesn't make sense to these youngsters.
I had a bad experience in trying to stand up for my daughter. So I don't know, is that a common feature?
Unfortunately, it is. I've had a number of parents even say that medical professionals wondered if they had Munchausen's by proxy, because they kept coming up to the doctor with, "My child has got difficulties in this."
What's Munchausen?
Munchausen's, it's a diagnostic condition where it's like a feigned medical condition where the parents create symptoms to try to get some medical attention from the medical profession, and it's seen as the parents being unstable mentally. But I've had parents saying, "No, I'm explaining to the doctor something's not right with my child. They're not able to ride a bicycle. They're not able to attend to their bathroom habits on their own. They're crying all the time." And it's all these subtle little bits and pieces that parents eventually become fatigued. But they're so certain, and every parent is the expert on their own child. But I've had several parents say that they ended up with a diagnosis, or that it was the medical professional threatened, "You are making a lot of these things up about your child." And they said, "No, I swear on the holy book that this is not."
Oh, how dreadful. Gosh, that's even worse.
It can be quite traumatizing to parents.
Yeah.
I think a long time ago I really wondered, why am I so passionate about this population? I have a story from my childhood about that I was able to share with someone from Europe yesterday. But anyways, as a professional who really sees how the motor domain is at the basis of all things, it's a very lonely journey. And I think I'm actually drawn to helping children with DCD because they go through life in a very lonely way as well. When you're not included and you can't play and you can't participate and you don't understand why, and other kids are teasing or bullying or mocking you, you choose to withdraw, you turtle. And professionally I've felt that a lot. But I'm so convinced about the need for people to understand DCD, become more aware of it, and start asking their professionals. That's when we'll really see change. Yeah. But I think it's because I can relate to their lonely journey. Professionally, that's how it's been for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, I really admire how you put so much of your life's energy, your professional energy, into supporting this group. Like, and from when I first met you, it's like, wow, you're so passionate about trying to help this group. And, you know, I can totally relate to you, but now I also can relate to the struggle that you must have, you have had professionally, and it must have been many heartbreaking stories. Now I've had my little heartbreaks and I've had lots of different situations, so I can kind of put it all into context. But yes, to continually see children not understood and the emotional toll that takes on the child, and also now I can appreciate the toll on the parents, the judgment that's put on them, the feeling like it's not okay to speak up and say what's worrying you, because then you're, goodness me, diagnosed as...
Exactly, and when you do speak up, people have their own opinions about you, right? Or the whole concept of rigid thinking might be applied to an adult in that case. When you know it, you know it. I guess that's it's worth the fight to me.
Yes, I need to keep bringing courage into it because, I think like most people, we worry about what people think of us.
Yeah, I guess I'm past that at this point in my life. Well, schools are set up in a way that they're looking for performance from children, right? And one of the main difficulties with DCD is that you have difficulty executing any kind of performance. So these children always struggle in school, and that's why I maintain that educational psychologists really need to know about this disorder, because it 100% affects academic achievement, academic performance, and then all of the other aspects of life that a child has at home. Play, social engagement, self-worth, the whole package.
Yeah, it runs deep, doesn't it?
So deep.
Oh, thank you. I've loved this conversation. It's kind of been wanting to do it for a long time and just talk about this aspect of, I don't know, developmental or learning disabilities. It's so important to understand.
Thank you for inviting me, and carry on. I hope you get many, many more people who are as fascinated by this topic as we are, and that this will go far, and that really parents viewing this will start to question, is this maybe more of what's going on with my child than what others have perceived so far.
Yeah, and it can be quite liberating.
Yeah.